Hey, everybody. Welcome to the inaugural Rise of the GM podcast. We're going to be talking today about some encounter starters. We're going to talk about why we game at all, what's the philosophy we started with, and why do we do it, and talking about some NPC stuff. Stick around, join us here on Rise of the GM. Welcome, everyone. My name is Matthew Thomas. This is Adam Caldwell, and we're going to be your host here on what is going to become a long-running podcast called Rise of the GM. Adam and I had this idea because we have gamed together since 2004. Now, he's done gaming before that. In 2004, I moved into this town, which is Charleston, Illinois, for all of you out there who might know of it. And I was invited to come game with him and his friends. At the time, I thought, what in the world? Who are these nerds? And lo and behold, I loved it and still doing it. You'll hear more of that story as we go, I'm sure. But we decided we've been doing this for such a long time. We love gaming. We've played lots of gaming stuff, not necessarily all the gaming stuff there is in the world. Goodness knows. We're going to hear about lots of that as we go. We'll have guests on who talk about things we've never encountered, but we love it. And we do often think about what's it like to be the GM and how do you do this? How do you why do you do it? How do you do it so that it's done well, so that your people enjoy the game night? And so we thought, you know what, this is something we talk about all the time. We're going to start talking about it and helping others who are just coming along, because we've had other people come along after us who have said, I want to GM a game. I don't really know how. I don't know what I'm doing. What's this all about? And so this thing was born. Rise of the GM. The GM, this is your time, and we're going to help here in that. And so we're gonna have some segments that happen every week. We're going to kind of talk about a little encounter starter and how we would adapt and bring that into a game. We're going to talk about an NPC character. Both of these, by the way, I just want to give credit where credit's due. There's a podcast called Gnome Stew. You should really check that out. Their their creators got together and wrote some books, a lot of good books. And we're going to be kind of doing a review, talking about some of those books in these sessions. But we suggest if you're really interested in what we're talking about as character hooks, encounters or characters that you can throw into a game, you should really check out Eureka. Is the name of the encounter book. It's 501 different encounters that you can start a game with or put into a game. And Masks, I think, is the name of the other one. It's 1,000 different NPC characters with different traits and stuff. We want to feature some of those here because we use those materials, and we think that they deserve the promotion. So go check out Gnome Stew. They're great. Check out their books, and we'll talk probably more about some of their other books as well. But Adam, why don't you just introduce yourself? But I kind of did that for myself. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But Adam, who are you here?
Yeah, we're gonna definitely get into more of our GMing experience and just kind of that history as the podcast goes on. But started playing RPGs in 2002. And so got a little bit over 20 years of experience. I was kind of late, I feel like, getting into it compared to some people, but just fell in love with storytelling and role-playing games. And we're going to talk here about, why we do what we do. But just that's been kind of a progression for me, is to get into the GMing world and run games and just craft those stories together. So I just want to echo that about the books that we're going to be using from Gnome Stew. Really amazing resources, for GMs to take and to make your own. And that's really what we want to do here as we dig into these. And there's a lot of resources out there for that are really big helps. You don't have to constantly be pulling stuff directly from your brain at all times. Sometimes these helps are really good to, whether it's getting you past a writer's block, kind of thing when you're doing games, or whether it's just oh man, what's some really good content that we can bring to this. So hopefully this is a help as we do that. So You want to jump into the encounter?
Yeah, I think hopefully most of you out there who are GMs also love reading. Adam and I have always read lots of books, and you get ideas from like the books, the novels you read. But when you don't want to always look like, the Lord of the Rings adventure party, and you don't want to always look like, whatever that last book you read. Sometimes it helps to have an encounter starter to get you kick started. And we're going to read one on each of these episodes, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how we would adapt and integrate that into something we're doing, how we would flesh that out. But we want to, with all of these, say that don't feel stuck to every detail of anything. So you got an encounter starter like this, or later we're going to talk about NPCs. I think it's important, and this is probably just some of my philosophy, to realize don't stick to every detail and feel like, oh, I don't really feel this, but it was written in there, so I got to put it in. If you don't feel it, cut it out, because you're the game master, and the whole point is to make this fun for your players. So having said that, we're going to start with our first encounter starter, and I'm going to, Adam, why don't you just read it to us? It's pretty quick, and then we'll talk about that.
Awesome. Yeah, so this is called A Peaceful Death is the title of this, but it says this: the PCs, who are well established and have a heroic reputation, are visited by an ancient creature of considerable power. The creature is dying of natural causes, and its death will come soon. Two of the creature's enemies, a mighty warrior and his arcane companion, have sensed its weakness and wish to capture it in order to sacrifice it and gain its vast power. The creature should inspire awe in the PCs, both because of its power and its importance in the world. It, like a kind and noble dragon that's safeguarded a holy site for centuries, and this plot will be more engaging for your players if the PCs have encountered the creature before. It's important to stress to the PCs through the creature how bad it would be for the mighty warrior to gain the creature's power. The creature asks the PCs for protection so that it may die in peace. The party must find a location where the creature can expire that can be easily defended, such as the creature's lair or the PC's own stronghold. The PCs must fortify the location against possible attackers. The warrior sends emissaries to the PCs to bargain for the creature's release, but the emissaries are a feint, and the warrior's minions launch a sneak attack to capture the creature. The PCs foil this attempt. After the first attack, a stranger approaches the location. The stranger is a long-lost lover of the creature who has come to be with the creature before it dies. The PCs must figure out who the lover is, that it isn't a threat, and then escort it to the creature. The warrior then mounts one final attack, this time with a larger force that includes himself and his arcane companion. At some point after the last attack, the creature dies. Its death should be a peaceful one that denotes not the ending of a mortal life, but the creature's passing to an immortal realm, one where the creature will await the PCs one day in gratitude. So there's a lot there.
Okay. Yeah. So you look at this, if I were reading this, and this is, again, we're trying to help people who are like beginning to GM, or we've been doing a little bit looking for new stuff. I would read this, and the first thing I would do is try to visualize what's happening and what I want it to look like. So they talked in here, I'm just going to say this right away. Adam might disagree, but they talked in here about like, oh, it could be like a dragon. I know this is heresy for a Dungeons and Dragons or an RPG type thing, but I don't really particularly like dealing with a lot of dragons. I have them in from time to time, but if I were reading this one and I wanted to make this just like a kind of awe-inspiring creature, I would not use a dragon, because I feel like they're used all the time and overdone, and people have such ideas in their mind about, oh, this is what a dragon is. This is what a dragon does. So for me, personally, as I listened to as I read this, and it's talking about like this should be some awe-inspiring creature of considerable power, I thought of some gigantic octopus. That's probably what I would do if I were doing this. And
Nice.
again, you can do whatever you want with these. This could be any creature you're looking at, but for me, having this kind of old ancient octopus, maybe they come up over a rise and they see a lighthouse, and the first thing they see is like a tentacle wrapped around it, or another one coming up. And as they get closer, they're readying for battle, but then they get this sense of peace and calm as this thing telepathically like begins to exude this peace and this invitation to help sort of thing. And I love the idea that it's something that doesn't have a mouth and won't be talking. It's all going to be like kind of internal dialogue coming. So that's what I would do. What about you, Adam? Did you
That's
even
cool.
have any thoughts that way?
Yeah, I don't know if I thought necessarily about the actual like what is the creature. Really, I do like that idea, and I do. There's probably an episode in there to talk about like how to make monsters or creatures not so old and worn out, kind of thing. But I do, I'm looking at it like two different ways. It's like one of the things is they talk in here about, you want to probably have them engage with this creature prior. And I think there is that if you're in like a long-term campaign, maybe there's ways to, they've interacted with it. Maybe they've helped it before, or it's helped them, or they've just kind of encountered it within like their adventures. But when you talked about that with like the coming across this like octopus creature, I almost wonder if I think it'd be cool to like bring that into a campaign where they're exploring, maybe they're going after something else, and they actually come across this creature in a dungeon or in their travels, and it's in this process of like it's weak, it's dying, it's trying to get somewhere, and they interact with it there. I almost find
I would even say like that running across before. I wouldn't even make it necessarily where they talk and have like this relationship so much as there's this mystery as they're on a boat going somewhere else for something. This huge shadow with a tentacle comes up, slaps the boat and moves on. And they're like, what the heck was that? And they may be thinking we have to fight this at first, but then it moves on. Or, they see two creatures far out at sea while they're on land somewhere. And it seems to be some like epic battle. And the last thing they see is like these huge, tentacles dragging something under, and they're like, what the heck is that? So they maybe see without necessarily direct experience. That's what I would do. Again,
using
cool because you can do it however you want. There could be that direct interaction, and you might make that work really well.
That's that like something I feel like I'm trying to do more in games that I run, that it's like it's very old writers thing is like foreshadowing, right? Like I think in the past, there's been times where I've just like throw this creature or this person or this character in front of people and expect there to be some kind of response. It's like, well, there was no response because you're meeting them for the first time. Whereas you can see their effects throughout the game, or you've run across them like that, or, oh, there's a creature in the deeps that we don't even understand what it is. And now it's finally revealed itself to be this thing. Like, I think that's a pretty good tool for the GM, is
and it
to
makes the world feel real, as opposed to like an episode. Every time something new is thrown at me, every time it's like, here's something new, here's something new, here's something new. You start to get this history and this timeline and this like there's a greater world out there, and I brush against parts of it.
Yeah. I have a question in this for you, Matthew. So there are ways to go about setting up games and setting up encounters and things like that. And one of the things that, they're trying to help us in a lot of this with these prompts, but there's a couple points where I think initially I'm like, kind of take a step back, and it's kind of the way that this prompt talks about like the PCs must fortify the location against possible attackers, or the PCs foil this attempt. There's like things in there that like this prompt is saying. And I wonder, and this may be too long of a conversation for this section, but like, what if they don't, kind of thing? Like, what if they fail? I think there's a whole nother like situation of, I always want my players to succeed. Like I want them to, but there's also these aspects of sometimes you don't, sometimes you fail, and there's more story to be had because we didn't do it. We didn't save this in time, or we didn't stop this from happening. And I just like, how would you say like, your group's playing, they fail to do one of these things. Like, how do you spin that? And maybe that's too much of a conversation for now, but
no, I think that's good. And I think this leads into another thing. When I read these, I think it helps me to visualize and to begin to think, how am I going to explain this to my PCs. And so let's go with the example I had where they come up and they see these tentacles around this, what would look like a lighthouse. But this lighthouse is odd because it's not out on a peninsula. It looks like it's kind of at the mouth of a great cave. And you're wondering, why would you have a lighthouse here? Maybe it's to keep ships from going in. But I would begin to describe this place as maybe the place where this great octopus, this huge giant, this mammoth octopus went to die. He knows he's dying. And I would describe this cave around and maybe some stone spires and stuff that this lighthouse may have been here to warn people not to come into this area. But as I explain it, hopefully they would begin to get the sense that, okay, we've got our backside and maybe two other sides mostly guarded. What are we going to do as this guy's coming on land or on water to keep, and so they would naturally start to think, okay, there's only one place maybe we could like stand between, and maybe it's not a full, fortify. But again, I wouldn't say your job is to fortify this. Maybe the most they would get is this sense of protect me as I die, from this telepathic communication. But like, I like the thing you said, it says here, they have the, somehow you have to like introduce who this warrior and his arcane lover or whatever it called him. You have to get a sense of, would they just get a sense of that from the monster? Would they have run across them in the past, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But they would then have this fight, whatever. And if they did not, it says in here, you repel them a second time, and then hopefully he dies in peace. Well, one thing I would love to do is like plan out what this scenario looks like with this thing. I think of the Never Beast. If you watch the Tinkerbell movies, and I know Rise of the GM, I'm not supposed to be talking about Tinkerbell movies, but I have kids. And
that's an epic movie, by the way. You should watch it.
That movie, the very last scene, when they're making it, for this thing to go to sleep, it's just going to go to sleep for like 1,000 years or something. But like the sense of sadness and calmness and that serenity and like that's like a really beautiful scene. And if I could think, okay, how can I like make a scene like that, especially if they've run across this thing 2 or 3 times, or they begin to like have some sort of feelings for it, it could be a really cool scene. But you have to allow. And I think one of the beautiful things about being a GM is you have to allow things to go where they go, and consequences to be consequences. And so there could be whether it's the bad roll of the dice, they roll ones and it's just horrible, or they have really bad planning and really bad ideas. And this guy,
that never happens.
Arcane person, like gets in here and just like slaughters this thing. Then I would have prepared in my mind, if this doesn't work out, what's that scene going to look like? And how is it going to be like, oh no, we have just not only allowed this thing to like have its power stolen, and maybe these two become like more epic bad guys for the rest of this campaign, because I think it said something about like they want to take its power, right? This ancient primordial power. I don't know how they would take that. Probably something with the arcane person. But anyway, maybe then these become a bigger part of the story than I had anticipated when I first read this encounter. That happens a lot. I have had people come along that I never thought were going to be huge villains or huge bad guys that have appeared 2 or 3 times, and one of my PCs just hates them. It's happening in one of my campaigns right now with a wizard called Sizen, and if the player who hates him is watching this, he knows. But it was one of those where initially he may not have been, and I don't think I'm giving too much away here, initially he may not have been as big a part of the story as he becomes.
Yeah.
And I have an overarching story in my mind, but I allow it to be fluid. And so, this warrior and this arcane person may become greater. And then how do they deal with the sense of failing that they had? And maybe that's something you play on more as they go. Or maybe one of them failed and the other one's like kind of blame him, but they're kind of trying to bolster him. There's going to be dynamics. I like to play with that. I like to allow them to fail. And if they fail, I like to allow them to feel like, I don't want them discouraged. I don't want them saying, I hate this game because we just get kicked all the time.
Right.
That's never in my plan. But I think you have to have a real threat of death for them. That's always something that I believe. Not every GM believes. Because the last thing you want is a character saying, well, even though this thing's so powerful, I know in the end we're going to win somehow. So let's just attack the ancient red dragon at level 2. You know, I like there to be the allowance of death that has to be in there so that they have a healthy fear, which makes it more fun. And secondly, they have to be able to fail sometimes.
Yeah,
that's my thoughts and opinions.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm writing this down because I think it's a worthwhile convo.
You're writing it down for the campaign where
yeah, right now. How do I kill? No, that I like that threat of death philosophy, but also like where I come from and which I'm jumping the gun, but our philosophy wise is like I'm not against my players. Like I don't want to be against the players, but also the balance of that, like, and again, I'm getting into the next conversation, but how do you balance?
I do think it's healthy for a GM not to feel like I want to win.
Yeah, right.
That's not fun. Our job is to tell a great story and make it fun.
Yeah.
And sometimes that involves conflict, and sometimes that involves them winning and just wiping people out so much. I think I did, again, we're going to get into lots of stuff. I remember running an episode once where I had something called the Wizard's Way, where magic didn't work and like 300 kobolds all attacked people on this. But one guy had something that allowed him to do magic, and he was just wiping out swath after swath of kobolds, and it was enjoyable, and so sometimes I want him to have that too. So.
Yep, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like we're starting to move towards philosophy. So maybe,
Let's move into our second segment here today, our second topic, and that is the game mastering philosophy. So this is a thread that will run through all of these podcasts, but why do we do it personally? Why do we as a collective GM? What makes it enjoyable? What's that like for us? So maybe let's start with us. Specifically, why do we GM? Why did you decide, instead of just playing games, which is how you started, why did you GM?
Yeah. So you said this too, Matthew, but like I love storytelling. That's always been a thing. Just kind of imaginative creativity and like thinking in that way. And stories have always, like reading and things like that, have always been really interesting to me. So like the game, I started with playing. I think one time maybe we were just on a hiatus or something, and I'm like, I'd really like to. I kind of got the bug to like I want to tell a story, this way. So just like inviting people in to do that, and thankfully everybody was very gracious, because I'm sure it was ridiculous as it often is. And even now, sometimes it's like, oh man, that was not great prep or something. But so being able to do that and really enjoyed it, and had some good feedback and encouragement in that. And I think when I started running, would have been D&D 3.5 was my first like campaign that I ran. That was like kind of, I felt like there maybe was like a vacuum a little bit at that point. Like our people who had run games prior needed a break, and to kind of be able to jump into that. So in a lot of ways, it's like, well, I like telling the stories in this way. I've wanted an opportunity, and we have a need, was kind of that moment that brought me to there. How'd you get started in that?
As I alluded to, when I was, I'll back up. When I was in college, I'm older. When I was in college, me and my friend, my roommate at the time, Patrick Tolbert, we didn't have a group that played, but we loved the idea. So we would like create characters with these elaborate backstories and like everything that they were about and their thoughts, and and then we would go through all that. And then we'd do nothing with it. We would start a new character and create a new. All we did was create characters. I always had fun with that, but I never played. So I kind of had this idea of people who played D&D. Probably have heard of this stereotype: the live in the basement, not always, the most contempt of people, whatever it was that was the thought in my head. And then I came here to Charleston in 2004, and I was invited to a game by Adam to go with to this other group they were playing. I had no idea what it was about. We went and kind of got me a character that I could play. And as we did that, I enjoyed that. I'd already done that. So I made up this nice backstory about this guy who, grew up with the circus and didn't really know his mom and dad and this whole business. Enjoyed it a lot and played with Danny Brown, the guy who was running that game at the time. And had such a great time with it. For me, as I moved into the GM spot, it was all about not just storytelling, which I love. I'm a natural storyteller, but I love the collective storytelling element of it. I love the fact that I had to adjust on the fly. I wasn't rigid. I'm not like running my guys through this, on rails through this just the way I want it to end up. I love the idea that I have like an idea and it can go totally sideways. And then I get to think, oh, if it went this way, what would happen? And I'm constantly creating. And I love that because other people are telling stories at the same time at the table. They're telling a story of who their character is and decisions they make. And then that changes everything. But as the GM, I have that kind of control. So I love the collective storytelling, but I also really loved being able to do, okay, so you won't have to be on here very long before you find out I like voices and I like characters. And so I like being able to, a lot of my characters that I play are people who do changeling stuff where I can like pretend to be various different people. Same thing with being a GM. You get to be everybody in the world that your player characters are not. So everybody they meet, you get to be, and you can have all kinds of different personalities and different voices and gruff or loving or enthusiastic or whimpering, it's just this whole collective palette. I love that. And I also really love painting really cool, solid scenes. For me, getting like the place and making it unique and having, conundrums and stuff so that later when people look back, they're like, oh man, that time we were on the gondolas on those wires and we were like, fighting in the air. That was crazy. Or the time that we were, I think of another time in the air when you guys were on those, we had some rock spires, just a whole, as far as the eye could see, rock spires. And they're trying to get across these, when all of a sudden these rocks, I think it was, these bird, it wasn't rock, some bird that come along and just hit you with their heads. They were trying to knock them off. Interesting battles. I love those kinds of scenes that stick in people's heads. So with characters and scenes and loving this collective storytelling, the GM role has actually been one of my favorites. I enjoy playing a character. It's nice, but I think I like GMing more. The problem is it's a creative outlet that takes some writing. It's a lot like a guy who writes a book. You got to sometimes be creative and come up with ideas. And so when I find myself in other areas of my life having to do a lot of creation, which I do, then it gets harder for me to like really feel like I give good creativeness to the game. And so I take breaks here and there, and Adam knows about this because usually when I take a break, Adam steps in and runs the campaign. We kind of switch. We're in the middle of 2 campaigns right now because I've been running one for like 4 or 5 years with breaks. And every time we have those breaks, it's Adam for like a year. These are long breaks. But yeah, that's I think what started me in game mastering. And there's a whole lot of philosophy that goes with that we talk about and we'll continue to talk about. But the things that make it enjoyable for me are the storytelling, the voices, the characters, and those memorable scenes.
For sure.
Yeah. Anything like for you that would cause a trigger before we move on to other stuff?
I think that the story, I love fleshing out, like if I, as a player, I always love fleshing out more than what even happens at the table. So a lot of times for me, I tend to want to write little vignettes of like, this wasn't shown at the table because I don't want to just like dominate, forever. But like this happened in a conversation off to the side while we were traveling, or throw back a flashback or what's actually going on in the character's brain while this scene is happening that wasn't going to be played out at the table, kind of thing. And I think that's like a world building thing. I think is like, it's a very small world, it's that character's world. And that's just something I'm seeing more and more. We're going to talk about different ways that people have fun eventually, but the fleshing out of a world is a thing that I'm more and more enjoy as a GM. So we get to the end of the campaign and it's like, I had a map and maybe some ideas about things that were going on when we started this. And because of what these characters did, or because of things that came to my mind, now we have full functioning cities that have, political entities. That's something that we're doing right now in this game, is everybody kind of had a hand in creating the way that this, like political structure has. And it's something I need to like get into my brain before we play later.
Later tonight.
Yeah, like later tonight. Always be good about prepping. That's the job, here. But, I think I was thinking about that a lot over the last couple of weeks. And I think that's one of my greatest moments of fun and like, even like satisfaction, I guess, I don't know if that's a weird word to use, but getting to the end of a game and being like, wow, there was like something created here that has some teeth to it, is pretty cool. So, I think that's my big one right now.
One last thing before we move away from this topic, what do we tend toward in the games the stories that we craft? I'll start this one. For me, it's epic. When I tell a story, I do not do well. And I know that this is just a purely subjective. And I've played in games that are great in all ways, but I have a harder time with episodes. Okay, you were hired by this guy, you're mercenaries, protect this ship, or caravan or whatever. And then next week it's like something completely different, has like no real tie. For me, right. The story has to be like the stories I read as a kid, where, you start with the guy, or in this case, the group that maybe they aren't much, but there's some hint of prophecy, or there's some like thing that is going to be huge. And as the story goes, they find out more and more. And it just becomes like this amazing. For me, it has to be an epic story every time. I don't do well at like little small mundane. You're just fighting and using magic. That doesn't do it for me. I have to have a greater purpose. And that probably goes back to my normal life. I feel like that in my normal life. There has to be greater purpose in whatever it is you do. Where do your stories tend toward when you craft stories?
Well, I think it has to be episodic.
Epic. I hate those epic things.
No, I'm laughing because no matter what I do, I feel like it goes that way also. And it does depend on the system, which, we're like we're focusing here in our like most conversations about like a D&D Pathfinder fantasy kind of realm. That's what we're focusing in on. And definitely those lean epic for me. I have tried and failed at least twice, saying, and it could go epic anyway, but I'm like, man, I want to just like get urban, gritty, like street level stuff. This game that we're going to play later tonight, they started out as Thieves Guild members. Everybody was part of this Thieves Guild. And lo and behold, we're like globetrotting, by the end of it, as everybody's going different places, and which is the second time that's happened. So I think that's just like internal for me too, where it's the stories that I love. Now there's other systems that I think that like works in better. We're going to get to those eventually too, but things like I love the game Red Markets. I love Sentinels of the Multiverse RPG. Like those two things, I feel like with Sentinels, I've still went epic, where it's like, okay, this is a big problem that we need to fix. I think there's some influence of like, MCU universe and things like that, of like building to something bigger that I like. But like with Red Markets, it's like job by job by job kind of thing. And there's a point, like we're trying to get out of here and make enough resources to do that. But even in that, I want to build a story that's ongoing, right. Not just, so I definitely move in that direction too, of like a greater purpose. But I've had some fun games that I've played where it's like, especially if you want to like low impact kind of, hey, we get together, a couple hours every other week and play. It's easy to jump into those episodic things and just say like, let's go, and not have to put like a ton of extra into it. So I've enjoyed those, but I definitely lean, let's build to a pretty world changing, thing. So, yeah.
I think both of us. Yeah. Very much like that. We're going to talk more about philosophy. We're going to talk more about every aspect of gaming and game creation as this podcast continues. But for tonight, we're going to finish up here with one last segment. And that is each week we want to just kind of, if you're in your story and you want an NPC, there's a book called Masks that you can quickly grab and get like Kickstarter ideas for an NPC. Or if you're at the table and somebody says, well, I go to a blacksmith and you didn't really plan that. And you go and they're like, okay, what's this dude? You can like look up blacksmith. You can look up shop owner or whatever and find like a character that has a few things. They have appearance of the player, how you would role play them, what their personality is, what their motivation is. And these are just like 1 or 2 sentences each. And then a quick little background and some traits. So I'm going to read one of these to you. This is the Evil Alchemist. Let's say they go into a small town and there's a guy there. And this is what you used. How would you flesh this out? How would you insert this in your game? So let me read this. This is in the Masks book. Thaddeus Quickmeyer is the name of this guy. And I'm going to start with his appearance. I'm not going to say his line yet because I always like to put the voice. But I want you to hear who's going to be this guy, what's he's like before we talk about the voice. So you got a short, stout, elderly man with a bald scalp, but a full white beard. He wears a number of charms around his neck that he's gotten from various travelers, right? Kind of their deities. And these were all gifts from travelers who came through. He wears an apron. When he's not serving patrons, he's sitting there wiping the glasses. So this looks like that guy you see in all the old Westerns who's sitting there just kind of wiping the glass and when you walk in behind the bar, right? So that's who he is. That's his appearance. Role playing. It says Thaddeus acts as if every patron is an old friend. As soon as they come in, he's very welcoming, even if meeting that person for the first time, right? He's always cheery and upbeat, consoling hurting patrons, that nothing is as bad as it seems. Okay, so he has a very personable attitude. Personality, it says here, is he's almost giddy, but that's because of what he's secretly doing to transient patrons, which you're going to find out in a second. His motivations, he wants to create monsters. This is what you don't tell your PCs. He wants to create monsters in order to make his tavern a more popular destination for adventurers because he's kind of in an out-of-the-way place. So let's read this background. Thaddeus is a frustrated alchemist who was unappreciated by his previous employers due to his lack of ethics. All right, so we already have that in his past. He settled down as an innkeeper in a new land. His inn is located in a quiet village that didn't sit on any main roads. All right, so he's decided in order to drum up business, he's going to poison travelers with magical beverages, turning them into monsters. So he's taking people who go through here and turning them into monsters to bring adventurers to this quiet place. It says Thaddeus's drinks are harmless. Well, first, the monsters have attracted adventurers from all around, have made this inn quite popular, so it's being successful. His drinks are harmless when he first gives them to you, unless the second component, which is a morning beverage. So he gets people who are spending the night, he gives them a drink at night, and then in the morning he gives them another drink, and that's the one that starts it off. And this is the way that he kind of keeps out of the crosshairs of investigators, because they come and they say, give us one of those drinks, we're going to test it. Well, you test it, you drink it. He would even drink it right in front of them, right? Nothing would happen because they didn't get the second component, which happens the next day. Second component by itself probably wouldn't do anything either. Thaddeus has managed to fool a few investigators who took notice of the drinks just because of this. Okay, so short, stout, bald dude with a white beard, and he would his catchphrase and the voice I might use. I don't know. I'm just coming up with something here. Here you go, lad. Drink up. It's on the house. Ah, yes, come in. No. Come on in. Drinks for everybody. You look like you've been on the road a long time. probably very tired and dirty. Let me get this first one. You guys can settle up with us afterwards. As a matter of fact, we have several rooms open if you're just passing through. So if he doesn't think you're an adventurer, he's wanting you to take a drink. He's going to give you that first one free. This is all in my imagination. Next day, he's going to turn you into a monster. All of that's because that's where he's getting his real business. The adventurers coming here looking for fame and fortune and all of that stuff. And so I like that kind of, if I picture a short, fat man, first of all, my shoulders go up because I'm short and fat and I've got a beard, right? So I'm going to stroke it like this. And I have that kind of, I don't know what that is, a hesitation in the voice. I would do this. Now, I'm a guy who loves voices. For me, when I close my eyes and picture that guy, that voice, that little bit of characterization, and I do it when I'm talking, I have that spark in my eye. I'm almost giddy because I'm turning people into monsters. So I took the stuff I read there and I'd make it into a character that hopefully is memorable for my PCs. And they would probably at some point begin to suspect this guy because I would let hints be dropped that maybe everything isn't as it seems. Maybe they wouldn't. Now, here's the thing. This is a character. This is an NPC. And you read this and you're going to be tempted to make this an encounter. Oh no, this becomes part of my adventure. Well, you may. Okay. Yeah. You may be like, okay, they stay and they figure out that he's doing this and they defeat him, whatever. But consider that they may not. This may be just a person they meet on their way to do whatever they were already going to do. It helps you to have this backstory, and that may lead to something later. It may not have to lead to this right now. So as a GM, I wouldn't feel like I have to force them into taking care of this before they got to whatever else they're getting to. They're coming into this little town. It's quiet, and they come across the guy who serves drinks. I just looked in this book to be like, who could it be and what could kind of his story be? Oh, it's this stuff. May never come to light, may come to light later. And that's the thing. I think it's okay, again, to recognize as a GM, you're the creator. See where the story goes. Talk to them. They may come to love this guy, and you may let them feel like this is a team up. This guy becomes their home base whenever they're in the area, and he always treats them really good because they are adventurers. So he doesn't give them the morning drink the first time because he recognizes, oh, they're doing the kind of stuff I want. But then later, maybe they begin to get suspicions that something's off, but they love this guy. This guy's always like the dude for them. He hooks them up with people contacts. He gives them free drinks whenever they come in, whatever it is. And then there's the twist. And this guy they thought they could trust is really bad, and he may become a bigger villain depending on how long he's in this story. That whole thing. I'm sorry, Adam, I'm just going off.
That's fine.
But depending on how long he's in their life, when they find out that he's a bad guy, it's gonna carry that much more emotional weight. And so you may end up he may have not have been part of your story, except you needed a guy to tend bar. But by the time you get done with your story, because you're a collective storytelling GM, by the time you get to the end, he's like the right-hand man to the biggest bad that they've got to fight in this whole campaign, right? Yeah. And they all along trusted him and told him secrets and told him what they were doing, and he was using it against them. So that could be really cool.
For sure.
I just went all off. Are there any thoughts you would have about if you heard this character, something you might do differently?
So we're almost of one mind there, because you're saying it, I'm like, yes. Feeling those things. I first glance, I looked at this prior and I was almost coming in. I'm not going to do a voice today. Maybe one day I'll do voices, but
Adam has some great.
It's not voices. Great. Usually what happens is I forget exactly what the voice was of the NPC. So then they get a new, and then I have to turn it as they're figuring themselves out or something. But
which that brings up a good point. You can get a lot of NPCs with different voices. If you're a guy who likes to do voices like me, it does pay to either take some notes on how you feel like your voice is in this, or if you have your phone has that little voice memo. I've done this. I know this sounds really nerdy, but this is how you do it. You say their name and you say a few sentences in their voice to remind you, this is who this guy is and what he sounds like. And then just before you get into a session where he's going to be, you play that, and it helps you remember, this is the guy.
Right.
So you're not like, hello, everyone. I am your tavern bartender who is helping you today. And you're like, oh, wait, that wasn't the voice I did.
Yeah.
So.
I'm new today. When we're in person, I have a little bit of a drive, and I actually do try to practice on that drive, particularly if I'm alone. I'm able to do that a little better.
This is when he's driving in a car, not
yeah, yeah, driving in a car, practicing and reminding myself, because practice does, those. Even though I don't feel super comfortable all the time, like practicing those voices is good. But going back to,
I keep cutting you off, and you're just trying to get back to the main topic. But this is what we do. I do the same thing, and it's a great place in the car to practice voices. And if you're wondering, how do I do that? One, you can just start having conversations with yourself, but you can also just read every sign you see in that voice to see if you can do it with words you're not accustomed to. Because what I found when I started was I could always say their one catchphrase. Oh, my name's Terlock Greg. I think that was one I used.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, how can I make sure I talk in that voice all the time and I don't fall out of it when I start saying unfamiliar words? So I read signs. I'm like, I know, stop at our church. We're here for you. Stop sign. Make sure you stop before you go any further here. And I just try and everything I see, I read it, and then I talk to myself about it, and I try and do it in that voice. So that's a good thing while you're driving.
That's good for sure. So going back to the Evil Alchemist for a minute. I originally came in after looking at that, and I had this idea in my brain of almost like a too sweet voice, like a little too eager, a little too, but I actually don't like that anymore. That was my original thought, because there is something about the way that you present is going to tip people off sometimes. And it's like, sometimes it's on accident. And it's like, this was supposed to be a friendly NPC and everybody hates the voice because it's making them feel like they have other designs or something, and you kind of have to deal with that. So I love that idea. And that's what I was starting to think of, it being a more longer term, not just a one-shot encounter of, oh, you've came to this bar, something's weird, we got to figure it out. It's that guy. He's now in prison, like that. You can do that. And that would be fine. But I love that idea of, this is a bar you frequent. Mm-hmm. You have gotten to know this guy. He's friendly. Actually, this is like really weird, but I'm almost feeling the stapler guy from Office Space.
Oh yeah.
Because I'm kind of feeling that in some ways, and maybe that's a little too off kilter, but that idea that was in the prompt of things didn't work out in his last job, or he wasn't appreciated, or those that made me think of that guy who is just kind of like, there's something going on in the back. He's like, I'll burn your building down, like that kind of thing that guy does the whole time. But
that's my story.
He's like, I'm going to make some monsters is what's going on. He's whispering, but not really. But regardless of that, almost like he endears himself to these characters. I also wonder, I think you can go definitely off and it's like a deeper and deeper thing, but almost, when it comes to a head, if this guy he's just thinking pragmatically, I'm trying to get my bar that's off the beaten path to have popularity, and maybe didn't think, oh man, I'm doing these evil things, or I'm doing these it's like more practical. And he's like, oh, I wasn't even trying to, what did I do wrong? I think there can be some of that too, which is obviously, these people are dead now, making it a little more kind of in that complicated, gray zone of what do we, because as a player, it's okay, I've befriended this barkeep who turned out to be creating monsters, but it wasn't oh, I have this evil design to take over the city or anything. It's just, how do you deal with that? And that gets complicated and kind of interesting to me, as far as a player. So tossing that kind of thing.
Changing innocent patrons into monsters might be a little easier for PCs to be like, yeah, this dude's bad. I don't care what his understanding of his intentions were. But I like that idea, making characters that are not all good or all bad. They're very gray.
Right.
That'll throw your paladins and your
Yeah.
these people who have like moral codes
Right.
into a quandary, especially if before they find it out, they get to know them and like them. That's always good stuff.
For sure.
Always good stuff. All right. Yeah. Well, hey, this wraps up what we got for our first episode, guys. We don't know how this thing is going to develop, how it's going to change over time, but we do look to have some good stuff for you if you're a game master looking to get into more understanding of what the game master role entails. We do want to hear from you because we have some plans for what's coming, but we also, just like that collective storytelling, we love it when someone says, hey, I want to know more about how do you do this? And so we have something we call the Haversack, and it's going to be on all of our socials. You can look on Twitter or Zeet or whatever it is now, Rise of the GM, right? All one word. You can look on Instagram, Rise of the GM. You can email us, riseofthegm@gmail.com. If you have something that you would like us to address on this podcast, we want to know about that because that's the kind of thing we love to do. So be sure and hit those places with your questions, with your comments, with the things you would like us to talk about, and we're going to do that. But that's going to end it for us today here on the first and inaugural episode of Rise of the GM. We're glad you could be with us. Thanks again.
Thanks.